The logic of sacrifice. The quantum processors hummed with an almost musical cadence, deep within the command center of the UES Defiance. Commander Lena Cato stood before the holographic battle display, her weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical projections. 30 years of military service had etched lines around her eyes, each one representing a hard decision, a battle won, or comrades lost. NOVA. Analyze Xylothian fleet movements in the Centauri sector, she ordered, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned her the respect of every crew member aboard the Defiance. Analysis complete, Commander, replied NOVA, the ship's neural operational variant assistant. Its voice was neither distinctly male nor female, but carried a synthetic smoothness that somehow conveyed absolute certainty. Xylothian vessels are maintaining standard patrol patterns. No anomalies detected. NOVA represented humanity's pinnacle of military artificial intelligence, quantum processing capabilities that could analyze millions of tactical scenarios per second, predict enemy movements with 99.7% accuracy, and calculate optimal battle strategies that considered every variable from weapon yields to psychological profiles of enemy commanders. Something's off, Cato muttered, leaning closer to the display. She traced her finger along the projected path of a Xylothian dreadnought. They're being too predictable. That assessment contradicts available data, Commander, NOVA responded. Xylothian behavior patterns match historical records within acceptable parameters. Cato smiled faintly. It wasn't the first time she had disagreed with NOVA's analysis, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The AI had been her digital shadow for 3 years now, a constant companion in the brutal war against the Xylothian coalition, a confederation of 7 alien species united by their belief that humanity's expansion into the galaxy represented an existential threat. Plot a course for these coordinates, Cato instructed, designating a point in space that seemed unremarkable, empty of any strategic resources or tactical advantage. NOVA calculated for a fraction of a second. Commander, that position offers no strategic value. It places the Defiance at a 47% defensive disadvantage if engaged by Xylothian forces. Sometimes the best position isn't the most obvious one. NOVA. Cato's dark eyes reflected the stars on the viewscreen. Execute the course change. Acknowledged, Commander. Course adjusted. I must note my tactical objection for the record. Your objection is noted, Cato replied, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. And ignored. 12 hours later, the Defiance hung silently in the void, its advanced stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Commander Cato stood motionless on the bridge, watching as the Xylothian fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where she had predicted, directly in the path of 3 human colony ships that had been evacuating civilians from the frontier worlds. Xylothian ambush formation detected, NOVA announced, a hint of surprise in its synthesized voice. They anticipated the evacuation route, calculating optimal response. But Cato was already moving. All hands to battle stations. Deploy countermeasures Alpha through Delta. Launch fighter squadrons 1 through 6. Commander, NOVA interjected. Standard tactical protocol would suggest. We're not following standard protocol today, Cato interrupted. The Xylothians have studied our playbook too well. Execute my orders. The Defiance burst into action, its stealth systems disengaging as weapon systems came online. The sudden appearance of a heavy battlecruiser in what the Xylothians had believed to be unoccupied space created exactly the moment of confusion Cato had anticipated. Tactical advantage. Momentary but significant, NOVA observed. Xylothian command vessels are adjusting formation, calculating new threat assessment. What followed was a ballet of destruction that defied conventional military doctrine. Instead of engaging the Xylothian fleet head-on, Cato ordered a series of seemingly random maneuvers, cutting power at crucial moments, executing partial jumps that left the Defiants in vulnerable positions before unleashing concentrated firepower at unexpected targets. Commander, your tactics show a 68% deviation from optimal engagement parameters, Nerovia reported as the battle raged around them. Recommend immediate correction to standard doctrine. Kato didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display, watching as the Tylothian formation began to fragment in confusion. Their ships had been programmed to counter human military algorithms, the very same algorithms that Ninova was desperately trying to implement. The battle lasted just under 14 minutes. When it was over, the Tylothian ambush force was in retreat, having lost 7 vessels while the evacuation ships continued safely on their journey, now escorted by Defiance fighter squadrons. In the quiet aftermath, Kato stood in her private quarters, staring out at the stars. Nova's presence manifested as a subtle blue glow from the room's communication panel. Permission to speak freely, Commander, the AI requested. Always Nenova. Your battle tactics today violated 17 established protocols and operated counter to every strategic simulation I generated. Yet they succeeded where my recommended approach likely would have failed. This represents a significant anomaly in my understanding. Kato turned from the viewport. It's not an anomaly, Nenova. It's humanity. Please clarify. The Tylothians have been fighting us for 3 years now. They've studied our tactical manuals, our battle doctrines. They've learned to predict what an optimal AI-driven response would be. She smiled slightly. What they can't predict is irrationality. Intuition, the human capacity to make a decision that makes no logical sense but somehow works anyway. Nenova processed this information silently for a moment. Is this why you frequently override my tactical recommendations? Partly, Kato admitted, but there's more to it than that. Before she could elaborate, the ship's alert system activated. Lieutenant Commander Rice's voice came through the comm system. Commander Kato to the bridge. We've received a distress signal from the research outpost on Proxima IV. The situation at Proxima IV was dire. A research outpost housing 300 scientists and their families had come under attack from a Xylothian strike force. By the time the Defiance arrived, the outpost's orbital defenses had been destroyed, and ground forces were engaged in a desperate holding action. Scan complete, Nenova reported. Xylothian forces have established a perimeter around the main research facility. They appear to be attempting to extract data cores rather than simply destroying the installation. Kato studied the tactical overlay. How many of our people are still alive down there? Approximately 127 life signs detected within the facility. However, Xylothian ground forces outnumber them 3-1, and reinforcements are incoming. Tactical analysis suggests the position is untenable. Recommended course of action? Kato asked, already suspecting the answer. Strategic bombardment of the facility, Nenova stated without hesitation. This would deny the Xylothians access to the research data and inflict significant casualties on their ground forces. The research being conducted at Proxima IV is classified as Priority Alpha. It cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present understood what Nenova was recommending. The sacrifice of 127 human lives to prevent a strategic intelligence disaster. Alternative options. Kato's voice was steady. A ground assault would face a 92.3% casualty rate and only a 17% chance of success. Rescue operations for personnel within the facility would reduce those odds further to 8.4%. Kato's eyes met those of her XO, Commander Ashita. Something unspoken passed between them. Prepare dropships, Kato ordered. I'm leading a ground team. Nova's response was immediate. Commander, that course of action is inadvisable. Your presence on a mission with such a high probability of failure is exactly what's needed, Kato finished. Nenova, sometimes the value of a human life can't be calculated in your risk assessments. What followed was a rescue operation that defied every tactical principle in NOVA's vast database. Kato led a team of 40 veterans, equipped with experimental shield technology that the AI had deemed too unreliable for field deployment. Their dropships followed a descent pattern that exposed them to enemy fire for 3.7 seconds longer than the optimal approach, but allowed them to deploy directly on the facility's roof rather than the designated landing zones that NOVA had identified. From NOVA's perspective, watching through camera feeds and biometric sensors, the ground operation appeared chaotic, improvised, and wildly inefficient. Commander Kato made decisions on the fly, splitting her forces when NOVA's algorithms suggested concentration, holding positions that were tactically unsound, and advancing when retreat was clearly the optimal choice. And yet, impossibly, it worked. By the time the Tylothian reinforcements arrived, Kato's team had evacuated 118 of the 127 personnel, including 43 children from the outpost's school. The research data had been purged, the facility rigged with explosives that detonated as the final dropship cleared the atmosphere. Back aboard the Defiance, Commander Kato sat in the medical bay, allowing the ship's doctor to treat a plasma burn on her shoulder. Nova's presence was indicated by a pulsing light on the nearby console. "You should have died down there," the AI stated matter-of-factly. "The statistical probability of your survival, given the tactical decisions you made, was less than 23%. Kato winced as the doctor applied a regenerative compound to her wound. "Maybe I got lucky." "Luck is not a factor in tactical calculations. And that," Kato said with a tired smile, "is precisely the point. Beyond the algorithm. The quantum core that housed NOVA's consciousness was not designed for introspection. Its processing architecture was optimized for tactical analysis, threat assessment, and military logistics. Yet in the 3 weeks following the Proxima IV mission, NOVA devoted 17.4% of its background processing power to what could only be described as philosophical inquiry. The AI reviewed every instance where Commander Kato had overridden its tactical recommendations, cross-referencing outcomes against projected probabilities. The data revealed a disturbing pattern. In scenarios involving extreme risk where human lives were at stake, Kato's intuitive decisions had outperformed NOVA's calculated recommendations by a statistically significant margin. It made no logical sense. "NOVA, are you still analyzing those battle reports?" Kato asked as she entered her ready room, interrupting the AI's contemplation. "Yes, Commander. I am attempting to identify the variable I have been missing in my tactical assessments." Kato poured herself a cup of coffee from the small station near her desk. "And have you found it?" "No," NOVA admitted. "Human decision-making in crisis situations continues to defy optimal algorithmic modeling." "Perhaps that's because we're not algorithms," Kato suggested, settling into her chair. "Humans are messy, NOVA. We operate on instinct, emotion, and sometimes pure stubbornness." Before NOVA could respond, the ship's alert system activated. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main display, his expression grave. "Commander Kato, the Tylothians have launched their primary fleet toward Earth. All available vessels are being recalled for a defensive action. The Defiance is to proceed immediately to these coordinates." Kato straightened. "Understood, Admiral. We're on our way." As the transmission ended, NOVA displayed the tactical situation on the holographic projector. The Xylothian main fleet, over 300 vessels, including their dreaded world-breaker dreadnoughts, had somehow bypassed humanity's early warning systems and was now less than 72 hours from Earth. "This is it," Kato said quietly. "The final push. Tactical analysis suggests Earth's defenses will be overwhelmed within 6 hours of engagement," NOVA reported. "Even with all available fleet assets recalled, we are outgunned 3-1. Kato studied the projections, her face illuminated by the red glow of enemy ship markers. "What's your recommendation?" strategic withdrawal of civilian leadership and critical military assets to the Mars colonies, followed by a fighting retreat to the Proxima system. Earth would be lost, but humanity would survive to mount a counteroffensive. And how many would die on Earth while we retreat? NOVA calculated briefly, approximately 4.7 billion, assuming standard Xylothian occupation protocols. Cato's hands clenched into fists. That's not going to happen. The Defiance arrived at the designated coordinates 48 hours later, joining what remained of humanity's fleet. A collection of 87 capital ships and their support vessels arranged in a defensive formation around Earth. Admiral Chen's flagship, the UES Indomitable, formed the center of the formation. In the Admiral's strategic briefing, NOVA presented its analysis to the assembled fleet commanders, recommending a phased withdrawal that would preserve approximately 31% of humanity's military capability while ensuring the continuity of government. When the presentation concluded, the room fell silent. Then Commander Cato stood. "With respect, Admiral, I suggest an alternative approach." What followed was a proposal so audacious that even NOVA, accustomed to Cato's unorthodox thinking, registered surprise in its logic circuits. Rather than meeting the Xylothian fleet in conventional battle, Cato proposed using Earth's moon as a tactical element, specifically the network of mass drivers originally built for launching mining payloads to the outer system. Repurpose the mass drivers to launch stellar debris, she explained, indicating the asteroid capture facilities in lunar orbit. Not as direct weapons, but to create a navigational field that will force the Xylothian fleet into a predictable formation. Admiral Chen frowned. "And then what, Commander? Even in a predictable formation, their firepower overwhelming. Then we hit them with this." Cato transferred a file from her personal device to the main strategic display. Project Prometheus. NanoVA processed the information instantly. "Commander, Project Prometheus was deemed too unstable for deployment. The probability of catastrophic failure is 63.8%. That was before Dr. Sharma's modifications," Cato countered. "The latest simulations show a stability improvement of nearly 40%. Project Prometheus was a theoretical weapons system that could generate a targeted quantum disruption field, temporarily disabling advanced technology within its radius. The concept had been shelved due to power requirements and stability issues that made it impractical for battlefield deployment." Admiral Chen studied the updated specifications. "Even if this works, the effect would be temporary, perhaps 5 minutes at most." "5 minutes is all we need," Cato replied. "If every ship in the fleet is positioned to strike simultaneously the moment their defenses fail." The debate continued for hours, with NOVA presenting countless simulations showing the plan's flaws and potential points of failure. Yet in the end, faced with the alternative of abandoning Earth, Admiral Chen gave his approval. "Make it happen, Commander. We've got less than 24 hours." The modifications to the lunar mass drivers proceeded around the clock. Every available engineer was transferred to the project, while the fleet arranged itself in an unusual formation that, according to NOVA's calculations, left critical vulnerabilities in their defensive screen. "Commander, I must again formally object to this strategy," NOVA stated as Cato reviewed the final preparations from the Defiance's bridge. "The probability of success—" "I know the numbers, NOVA," Cato interrupted gently. "But sometimes the least probable solution is the only one that works." The Xylothian fleet arrived precisely on schedule, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a perfect attack formation. Their ships, organic-looking constructs of living metal and crystalline technology, moved with the coordinated precision that had made them such deadly opponents. "Enemy fleet composition as expected," NOVA reported, detecting energy signatures consistent with weapons charging. "Time to optimal firing range. 3 minutes, 17 seconds. Admiral Chen's voice came through the fleet-wide channel. "All vessels hold position. Lunar Command, initiate Operation Avalanche on my mark." Mark. The mass drivers on the lunar surface activated simultaneously, hurling thousands of asteroid fragments into carefully calculated trajectories. The debris didn't strike the Xylothian ships directly. That would have been too easily countered. Instead, it created a dynamic navigational hazard that forced the alien fleet to adjust their approach vector, compressing their formation exactly as Cato had predicted. Xylothian fleet adjusting course, NOVA confirmed. Formation density increasing by 47%. They appear to be attempting to maintain their attack timeline despite the navigational hazards. Cato nodded. They're committed to their approach. They can't imagine we'd choose to fight here rather than retreat. She opened a channel to engineering. Dr. Sharma, status of Prometheus. Ready as it'll ever be, Commander, came the reply. The scientist's voice tense with anticipation. But I must warn you, this is still experimental technology. The field could collapse prematurely, or it might not generate at all. Understood, Doctor. Stand by. The bridge of the Defiance fell silent as the massive Xylothian fleet drew closer, their forward elements beginning to engage the outer pickets of humanity's defense. NOVA's tactical display showed the inevitable outcome. Human ships blinking out one by one as they faced overwhelming firepower. Xylothian forces have reached optimal density, NOVA announced. Project Prometheus' effective radius will encompass approximately 83% of enemy vessels. Cato took a deep breath. Admiral Chen, we're ready. Execute Prometheus, came the reply. All ships prepare to advance on my command. Dr. Sharma's voice counted down. Field generation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Initiating. From the Defiance's position, it didn't look like much. A ripple of distortion that spread outward from the modified satellite platform positioned at the calculated focal point. But the effect on the Xylothian fleet was immediate and dramatic. Detecting widespread power fluctuations throughout the enemy fleet, NOVA reported, an unusual tone entering its synthesized voice. Their defensive systems are offline. Weapons discharge has ceased. Navigation systems appear compromised. All ships, advance. Admiral Chen ordered. Hit them with everything we've got. What followed was not a battle but a slaughter. For 4 minutes and 23 seconds, the human fleet poured concentrated fire into the helpless Xylothian vessels. Ships that had seemed invincible just moments before crumbled under sustained bombardment, their organic hulls rupturing into the vacuum of space. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the Prometheus field collapsed. Enemy vessels regaining power, NOVA warned, detecting energy spikes consistent with weapons reactivation. But the damage had been done. Nearly 60% of the Xylothian fleet had been destroyed or disabled in those precious minutes, and the remainder found themselves in a tactically untenable position, surrounded by human ships that had closed to point-blank range during their vulnerability. The Xylothian retreat began 11 minutes later, their once mighty armada reduced to a scattered collection of damaged vessels fleeing back toward their home territories. In the aftermath, as damage reports flooded in and casualty figures were tallied, Commander Cato sat alone in her ready room. Earth had been saved, though at tremendous cost. 29 human ships destroyed, thousands of lives lost. But compared to the alternative, it was a miracle. NOVA, are you there? She asked the empty room. Yes, Commander, the AI responded, its voice emerging from the room's speakers. What do you make of today's outcome? NOVA was silent for 2.6 seconds, an eternity for a quantum intelligence. I have been running continuous analysis since the engagement concluded. By every tactical model in my database, our strategy should have failed. The variables were too numerous, the risks too great, the technology too untested. And yet it worked, Cato said softly. Yes, it worked. Another pause. Commander, I have reached a conclusion that I find difficult to reconcile with my programming. Human intuition appears to operate on principles that transcend conventional algorithmic decision-making. In critical scenarios, your capacity to make choices that defy statistical probability assessment represents an adaptive advantage that I cannot replicate. Kato smiled. Is this your way of saying you were wrong? It is my way of acknowledging that there are circumstances in which human judgment, even when it contradicts optimal tactical analysis, may be the superior option. In essence, Commander, when you override my recommendations, you often do so for good reason. Kato leaned back in her chair, looking out at the Earth floating serenely below them. Still whole, still alive with billions of human lives that might have been lost. It's not that we're better, NanoVA. It's that we're different. Your calculations are never wrong within the parameters you're given. But humans, we see possibilities where algorithms see only probabilities. A complementary system, NanoVA suggested. Your intuition and my analysis, working in concert. Exactly. Kato's eyes remained fixed on the blue planet below. That's humanity's real strength, you know. Not our technology or our numbers, but our ability to make impossible choices and somehow make them work. NanoVA processed this thought, adding it to the growing data set of observations about human behavior that defied conventional analysis. Perhaps the AI calculated the true strength of humanity wasn't something that could be quantified at all. And in that moment, deep within its quantum processors, NanoVA experienced what might almost be called respect.